and welcome back to my channel. Before we get started on this video, I just wanted to remind you, if you're not already a subscriber, make sure that you hit that subscribe button down below, and don't forget to also hit that notification bell so that you can be the first to know when I post new videos. In today's video, we're going to be talking about tone and how to improve your tone on the flute. Whether you're a beginner flutist or you've been playing for years and years, tone is always one of those things that you come back to and you're constantly trying to improve. That being said, I will tell you that I don't have a one-size-fits-all solution for how to get the best sounding tone. Tone is something that's unique for every flute player, and it's something that you have to do a lot of experimentation with in order to figure out what you want in your flute sound. Two of the most common complaints that I hear about tone, whether it be from a student or other flutists or even myself, is first of all, my tone feels like it's fuzzy or airy. And then second, my tone feels unfocused. I don't feel like I have a centered tone. Those are usually the two main things that frustrate flutists no matter what level of playing that they're at. So let's say you're a beginner flutist and you haven't been playing very long, but you finally started to get a consistent sound on the flute. That's one of the biggest hurdles when starting flute, is just being able to get a sound and actually having that sound happen every time that you go to play. Once you figure that out, then comes the issue of tone and actually refining the sound that you're able to make. Now, if you've had a flute teacher that you've worked with, they've probably talked about your aperture and your embouchure and the direction that you're blowing air into the flute. All of those things have to do with producing a good tone. And no matter where you are on your journey as a flutist, sometimes going back to those basics can help you figure out what's happening with your tone and can sometimes be the key to unlocking an even better, richer, and more refined tone. So I'm going to go through a couple of the things that I do to problem solve when I'm having issues with my tone and I'm not happy with how it sounds. First, let's talk about the aperture. So you've probably heard this word if you have a flute teacher or a band director that's worked with you on the flute. But if not, your aperture is just the shape that your lips are making as you're blowing air into the flute. The aperture shape can have a lot to do with how your tone is sounding. So when you play the flute, you want your aperture hole to be relatively small. You still want enough space, of course, for enough air to come out into the flute, but you don't want it to be a huge Grand Canyon-sized hole. So this is one of the times where you'll have to do some experimenting. So if you're kind of getting in the ballpark of where your aperture hole size needs to be, think about whistling. So when you whistle, you're going to poke your lips out, and there'll be a small hole. Now, of course, you don't play the flute like you're whistling, but in order to kind of pinpoint a good aperture hole size, put your lips in the whistling position and then pull your corners back slightly. So right about there is where you want your aperture hole to be. So on my flute, you should barely be able to see a small hole. Another thing that's really important is where your flute is actually sitting on your lip. So a good rule that I like to start with to help me figure out where my lip should be in relation to the embouchure hole on the flute, the bottom part of your lip, there's a little line. You should be able to feel the inner edge of your embouchure hole on your flute. So if you put that up to your lip and anchor the flute to your chin so it's nice and stable, you should feel a little bit of your lip going over the tone hole of the flute. If you have the tone hole too high on your lip, you're going to get a super airy, unfocused sound. If you're covering too much with your lip, then it's going to be hard to produce a sound at all because you're covering too much of the tone hole. After you've figured out where your flute should be vertically, the next thing is figuring out where your flute should be sitting horizontally. So you basically want the center of your aperture hole to be aligned with the very center of the tone hole on your flute. So for my lips, my aperture hole is pretty much right in the center. So I'm going to look in a mirror and make sure that the center of my aperture hole is lined up directly with the center of the tone hole. Now, some people have what's called a widow's peak, where the middle part of their lip actually comes down a little bit, and that's totally fine, and you can still make a really great tone if you have a widow's peak lip. You just have to make a few little adjustments to where you're blowing into the tone hole. So you still want your aperture to be aligned with the tone hole in the center, but if your aperture hole is a little bit to the left or to the right, you're going to need to check that mirror and make sure that the center of your tone hole is still aligned with the center of your aperture. A good way to check if your air is aimed in the right direction and you're on your way to producing a good tone is to use your mirror again, and you're going to blow into your flute. I'm just going to play a low A. Now in my mirror, I'm looking for some condensation that comes from me blowing air into the flute. If you see condensation around the whole part of your lip plate while you're playing, that means your air isn't very focused and you need to either adjust your lips. Lots of times bringing your lips a little bit forward or back will help focus the embouchure hole. But what you're looking for is a V shape. So the opening of the V should be closer to you, and then the tip of the V should be down at the bottom or towards the bottom of the tone hole. So hopefully you can see this on the camera, but when I play, I'm wanting that V shape. So one of my favorite books to use when I'm working on tone, and it's really just a great everyday warm-up book, and you can skip around different parts and work on different registers, is the Trevor Y Flute book. This is his practice book number 1. He has other books like this for vibrato and articulation and technique, and they're all really fantastic. This first book is the tone book, and it has a ton of really great tone exercises to help you improve your tone. And he's also written in, before different exercises, he's given you some direction on things to think about. He talks a lot about colors and actually associating your tone with different colors. So the purple color would be a rich, dark tone, whereas a green color would be a brighter tone. There's actually different tips he gives you in here to kind of help you think about tone in terms of color and to really bring out different aspects of your tone. Another thing that I find to be super helpful in improving my tone is harmonics. And they're actually incorporated in this book. He has some harmonic exercises at the beginning of the book. So harmonics are just overtones, and I can guarantee you've probably played them without even knowing them. If you're a beginner flute player and you heard your flute crack or play a note that didn't sound like what you actually pressed down on the keys, that was probably harmonics happening. So depending on how you blow your air and how you use your air, you can actually hit different levels in the harmonics series just using one fingering on the flute. This is really helpful when you're working on tone because you have to be really precise in order to hit each of those harmonics for each note. So for example, if I start on a low C, this is the really low C with the roller key, and I play a low C, I can play the C above that just by bringing my lips forward and blowing my air out a little bit more. That's what harmonics is. And it's really great to work on your tone because you have to be so precise to hit each of those overtones. My last tip for improving tone is singing and playing. And yes, both of those happen at the same time. So it may sound like a very foreign concept to sing while you're blowing air into the flute. And I will tell you, when I first started doing this with my teacher, it was very strange to me and very awkward. But it gives you almost immediate results when it comes to your tone. All of the fuzziness literally disappears out of your tone. It's the most amazing thing. So I'm just gonna take a simple middle register exercise out of the Trevor Y tone book. If you have the book, this is on page 14, and this is exercise number 2. It starts on a G and it's descending chromatically. So it sounds like this. But if I add in singing while I play, it sounds like this. It doesn't sound the prettiest, I know, but I promise you it will make your tone a lot more open and a lot clearer. So now I'm going to play it without the singing and playing, and let's see if there's a difference. I don't know if that came across to you on the video, but I can notice a huge difference. Some of the little bit of airiness that I heard in my tone originally has pretty much disappeared. And all I did was sing while playing that one time. So practicing singing and playing and getting really proficient at it is going to be a huge help for your tone. It does take a little time at the beginning to get the hang of it and to get your throat working with your air into the flute, but once you have it, I promise it's going to make a huge difference in your tone. If you want me to go into more detail on how to sing and play and how to actually make that happen, let me know in the comments below, and I will make a separate video just about singing and playing. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. Unfortunately, I can't give you a one-size-fits-all solution for tone, but hopefully some of these tips and making some minor tweaks will help to make a huge difference. As you're working on tone, less is more. So it really might only take you moving your head joint a little bit, or changing your aperture size, or aiming your air a little bit differently in the flute, and that could make the biggest difference in your tone. Let me know if you have any more questions about tone, and also I'd love to hear if you have any success stories after trying these tips. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Is the Trevor Y Flute book. This is the vibrato book. And no matter where you are in your journey as a flutist, sometimes going back